Hey Amarillo, I'm Skylar Gallup, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo. It's the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. We record each week at the beautiful offices of Rosenbach Contractors. They're experts in high-end design and construction, creating stunning and functional spaces through both new builds and remodels. Today's guest is Dr. Shanna Peeples. Shanna is a Panhandle native and career educator who had the incredible honor and distinction of being named National Teacher of the Year, an experience that Shanna says was like riding a bull. Before that, she was in the classroom, directly impacting her students. And in the time since then, she's found ways to use her incredible experiences to directly impact students in classrooms. It's really clear that Shanna has had a career of impact as only a teacher can. And she's far from done. Here's Shanna. Shanna Peeples, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Skylar.
Excited to visit with you.
Yeah.
Let's start with the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Borger, so not too far away.
And when you were kind of being raised in Borger, what was that like? What were your aspirations?
Oh, goodness. I was the odd kid. Always like doing things that were not the norm, probably. And just for a really painful example, I was like a Star Trek fan when it was not cool to be a Star Trek fan. And I had the science officer uniform and wore it to Borger Middle School thinking, oh, everyone's going to think I'm so cool. No, they did not. Not one bit.
That's a bold move in middle school.
I was under some sort of delusion that everyone would think it was cool, but that's what I mean. I was always doing something odd and something always making my family question, why couldn't be quote unquote normal.
I think that really is kind of indicative of a really strong personality, though. Certainly at that age. What do you think about that?
That's such a nice way to say it, Skylar. The thing about Borger is that it's really kind of unique in the Panhandle. Now, folks from Pampa may disagree, but my dad was in the oil and gas business in that he did sales. So he was selling equipment and things like that to oil and gas fields. And because of that, and because Phillips 66 was based there, that meant that we attracted people from all over. So I had fantastic teachers who had been world travelers and encouraged this kind of creative thinking. And that's how we had some interesting programs in Borger, certainly our theater programs. But I was involved in the school paper. When we restarted the school paper, I was one of the editors of the school paper. So yeah, that was great.
That's really interesting, and as you know, kind of unexpected for a small town to have to have more than the football program, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yet that happens.
Yeah, and it was a different time, I think, in that we had so much economic churn through Borger because of the refinery. A lot of interesting people came through there. Again, unusual for Borger, and Borger was close enough to Amarillo, where that big city, where we could come over here on the weekend, and go to the movies. Back when Western Plaza Mall, I'm really dating myself, was the big mall to come to back in that time. But I think because I had such great experiences in school and was blessed with such great teachers, I think early on it sort of put me in that frame. But I'll be honest, I joined Future Teachers of America in Borger High School because I knew they got out half a day. And that was a lot, the reason I went. And so,
Listen, whatever works for recruitment, right?
right. And it's like, it's inadvertently, it was my destiny. I have told young people that, be careful what clubs you join. You could be writing your destiny.
Yeah, that half-day incentive certainly paid off if the mission of Teachers of America was to create good teachers.
Yeah.
Because I think you've kind of paid your dues in that profession.
Oh, and I would have been like the last person I think they would have thought that would do that.
Why do you say that?
I was always wanting to be like the vice president of everything, because it's like you got a title, you were an officer, but you didn't have to do very much. So you got the jacket and all of that, but you did not sit in the hot seat that the president got into. And I was just one of those people who was always creative. Let's see, what could I say? Creatively lazy, I think. Always looking for how to maximize opportunities. And I think that's why I've always loved middle and high school, but particularly high school teaching, is because there's a part of me that's probably never left that world and saw myself in so many students.
How funny. I mean, though, efficiency is a really valuable skill.
It is, I think. And, was it strategic thinking? I mean, we can be charitable and say I was strategically thinking. It's, one of my Clifton strengths when you do the Strength Finder. And there probably is something to that. But those tend to be the types of students, to the ones who are like, why am I taking this class? I don't like this. I'm not interested in any of this. Those tended to be the students I really liked. I mean, they put me through my paces and made me a better teacher.
So let's go kind of through that journey from Future Teachers of America. Where did you graduate high school wanting to go get your education degree? Is that what you did?
Oh no.
No. Okay, good. I love a windy story.
Yeah. Well, I got to WT, and what I wanted to major in was mass media,
nice.
Broadcasting. I was named for, my mother didn't know any other Shannas, but she knew on 60 Minutes the journalist Shanna Alexander. And so she added an N and made me Shanna. And I've forever had to tell people it's Shanna like banana because they want to say Shana or Shauna or something like that. And it's like, I don't know, it's that sort of aura of having that birth name of you were named after a journalist. So I thought, oh, this is going to be cool. This is going to be glamorous to go into broadcasting. And it was not as glamorous as I thought. I worked my first radio job at the AM station where Z93 was housed. And I would tell people I worked at Z93 so they would think I was cool because that was like the cool pop station at the time. But no, I worked on the AM side, which was the easy listening, like Glenn Miller, that type of thing. And there was not a lot of glamour to that job. I did all of these other types of jobs, I said, before I was like, okay, I am going to really focus here. I'm going to get my English degree, and I'm going to go and, write and do all these great things. And came out of it thinking, any minute now, adventure will happen, excitement will happen, because that's what this type of job does. And I did other things, like was a pet babysitter in Beverly Hills. For rich people.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It does sound fun, doesn't it? It was not fun. It was interesting even then to see how spoiled certain dogs and cats were in that area, the Platinum Triangle there of Beverly Hills and Topanga Canyon and all of that. And I did that for quite some time until I thought, none of this is glamorous. California's not glamorous. This is not glamorous work. I'm going to come back. And I worked for an eye surgeon and all of these other things, thinking, well, maybe medicine's the path. Before I finally called WT to see, okay, those education credits I halfway finished, like what would it take for me to go back through and get those? And they said, oh, it's a good thing you called because in 6 more months, these would have expired.
Oh.
And the whole thing that had made me think that way was I worked for the Globe News, and one of the things I did at the Globe News was cover schools. So I covered the Tascosa cluster was one of the school clusters I covered. And I realized that I loved being in those classrooms. And it sounds like really, oh, I just loved being with kids. And I did, and it was fun. But the turning point came when, I was asked to speak at a career day at, Avondale Elementary. And you could tell the kids were disappointed right off because I think they'd been told a reporter was coming and they thought, oh, the lady from TV.
The lady from
and
the
so
news.
When it's the lady from the newspaper, they're like, oh. So one kid asks me, how much money do you make? And I told him, and the teacher was drinking coffee off in the corner, and I heard her choke and go, what? What? That's how little you make working at the Globe News? And
I made a reporter's salary one time. I understand.
Yeah, so I couldn't believe that was the focus. And she pulled me aside afterwards and said, no, seriously, you really need to rethink this because you probably don't even have health benefits. And I was like, not really. I don't even know what that is.
She's like, can I get you some food?
So my joke became that I went into teaching for the money because I did get a $10,000 raise, Skylar.
Oh, gosh.
Between what I was making at the Globe News and what I started at for Amarillo Independent School District.
Listen, I believe it.
It's
luckily you had fortuitous timing and got your credits. You started at AISD. Mm-hmm. What did you start teaching?
It was funny because I had another one of those sort of delusional moments where I went to the personnel office and John Hancock, who was the personnel director at that time, said, before I tell you what we have, I'd like you to tell me what you see yourself doing. And I said, well, I see myself teaching advanced placement English at Amarillo High or Tascosa, preferably seniors. And he laughed and said, well, I hope you see yourself teaching 7th grade English at Horace Mann because that's the only opening we have.
That's kind of a trick question. That's not even really fair.
Right. But that's, anyone that knows him knows that.
Okay.
That's the type of person, he loves that.
Okay.
And he always loved that story. But it was true. That's what he really did. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's no way. I don't know how to teach middle school. And I've not really been on the north side. I don't know anything about it. And all of that was true. And it was a very difficult first year of teaching, really first semester of teaching. And I really wanted to quit at Christmas. And I'll be honest, some people did. They didn't come back. And I, over Christmas, thought, okay, I've got to see this through before I go crying back to the Globe News and ask for my job back. But I've got to see it through. And I happened to read over Christmas a short story by Sandra Cisneros, 11. And she had this wonderful line in there that says, we're all the ages we've ever been inside ourselves, like rings in a tree trunk. And she gives the example of maybe some days the 3-year-old part of you is hurting, or maybe someday it's the 7-year-old that got angry, and that's who comes out. And there was something about that captured my imagination. And I thought, why don't you remember what it was like for you when you were 12? And 12 is such a hard age. Now, you're the mother of a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
It's hard because you're too big to be little and too little to be big.
You're so caught in the middle.
And It's when you first experience maybe some true tragedy or heartbreak, such as not getting picked for the team.
Yes.
Or having to be benched the whole time. It's the first time you might write a note that says, "Do you like me? Yes or no?" And it comes back no. It's a hard age. And once I really sat with that and realized that, I thought, here's the issue. I've been teaching them from a distance. I've been teaching them from this title of the teacher. I have not connected with my own 12-year-old that remembers what it was like to be here, and maybe that's what I need to do. And that changed everything. It helped me see them as the complicated young people that they were, and that they had a real intellectual power and curiosity inside of their heads. And connecting to that was what could engage them. And we could do really cool things. Once we sort of put English or writing or books sort of in the middle of the classroom, and we sort of all came around that as, let's look at this cool thing and let's learn this together. So, I cried the whole first week I started teaching because I thought this is the worst job ever. And 6 years after teaching at Horseman, I cried for a week because I thought I'll never love anybody like them before I shifted over to Palo Duro, where I taught English at Palo Duro for another 6 years.
What a beautiful perspective, I think, to bring to teaching in your experience, but also I think to bring to children. You mentioned my kids are that age, and I try to treat them as people. You know what I mean? As opposed to kids that I am in control of. And I think that's a lot. I think that when I'm able to successfully do that on a good day, it transforms their own autonomy, to put them kind of in the driver's seat of like, you're a human. We're just at different ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I discovered, and it was really sort of out of desperation, one day I asked them to think about the questions that they didn't ever share with anybody. And it came out of my own. I told them, working at the newspaper, I saw a lot of sad stories. And I said, one of the questions that I can't get out of my head is, why do bad things happen to good people? And I said, but anymore, I've become obsessed with the other part of that. Why do good things happen to bad people? And I said, what I mean by that is, why do some people get away with it? Why? And I said, it's a way. I said, the big concept here is justice and fairness. And I could tell. You can always tell as a teacher when you've struck the nerve of what's going on in the classroom, and there's a certain kind of silence that develops as you can see that, oh yeah, these are questions I had. So I had them write down their questions on these index cards, and I said, write down all the questions. Don't put your name on the card, just write down all the questions that you carry inside you that maybe you never told anybody, or you think about right before you go to sleep, or when you're riding in the car, or whatever. And I said, just pass them in and we'll talk about them later. And of course, the end of that day, I'm pouring over these questions, and they're amazing. They actually mirror sort of when I looked at it, it's the 9 great questions of philosophy. They could have been grouped under any of those. Basically, what happens to us after we die, and are there aliens, and, all these deep questions. And that became the focus of I'm probably still continuing that research project all these years later, but it became a focus for me. And the fancy term for that in education is inquiry-based learning.
Okay.
But really, it's just all about engaging curiosity and sort of channeling that a little bit, encouraging questions, encouraging wonder, which I think in turn encourages empathy and connection and belonging.
I love that. Before we move on to Palladero, my love of reading was sparked in the seventh grade with a specific book, and I remember it. It was Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, wow.
Loved it so much,
Yeah.
and I was just like, I didn't know that you could just read and experience things that you didn't know. What were your books that your students read in seventh grade? If you have
Oh,
those
goodness.
go-tos.
That is cool that you read that in seventh grade. Often that is a high school book. In seventh grade, we read a lot of short stories, I will say. But one of the books that was standard at that time was The Giver by Lois Lowry,
Very good.
which is a difficult read for kids. So that was one of them. And we looked at poetry too, because, at first they were like, I hate poetry. I think it's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we started looking at the same sort of poetic, rhetorical tricks that these poets were doing are also showing up in people like Jay-Z's lyrics, then it became interesting.
Yeah.
Then it became like, oh, so this is actually a way to do things with words that affect people and affect their moods. And so that was really fun. So we did a lot of that kind of thing rather than maybe reading like a more than one whole novel, because a lot of the students that I worked with had a lot of challenges. Myriad, not only learning challenges, but they had challenges that in their home life, like once they left, they had a lot of challenges with having moved a lot meant that they didn't have sort of a coherent through line of reading skills being supported. So a lot of what I was trying to do was almost like my dad did selling, oil field equipment. I was trying to sell literacy to them. I was trying to sell reading and writing to them as a way to find their place in the world.
What was the transition to PD like? Did you get that AP English classroom?
Not till right at the very end of my career there. No, it was fascinating because I taught in the night school program that we had at the time too. So I would teach all day usually, and I taught all the grades. But I would get there at like 7 a.m. and I would have kids who were waiting outside for whatever reason. And then I would teach until 8 o'clock at night, because once the day was over at 3:30, I usually had a group of kids I was tutoring or whatever. And then at 4 o'clock, I had to hurry out to the library where we did our night school from 4 to 8. For kids who, for whatever reason, couldn't do day school. So what that meant was that some of my kids were girls who had gotten pregnant and were trying to accelerate their credits so they could stay with their class and graduate on time. So they were trying to get ahead of the game. Or it was kids who their parents may have been too sick or disabled to work, so they had to work in the daytime and come to school at night. So one of the oldest folks I worked with in Flex was a woman who was in her 40s coming back to get her high school diploma that she hadn't finished at Caprock. And so we were able to finish her credits and she got a diploma so she could then go on to nursing school. So it was really, all of that was very rewarding. And it became an instance where, I really like working with kids who have challenges. And so when we got sort of our first wave of immigrants from East Africa, my co-teacher, Elaine Laughlin, and I were the ones who sort of worked with that as one big group together, newcomer refugees. So we had students from Myanmar, which I knew as Burma, and all of the different groups of folks in that country, and they all showed up in our classrooms, and some of them had never lived indoors. They had lived in a refugee camp. So they lived in these sort of lean-to fixtures where they ate UN food rations over sort of an open butane flame, and that was their life. So not only did they have trouble understanding anything, but when we're trying to even read children's books, they have no concept of kitchen or, those types of things. So it was probably it was a master class in learning how to teach and having to reach out to my friends who taught early literacy and learning all those things. You don't really learn when you are an English major that's trying to get a teaching degree and wants to teach secondary. We just don't learn those things.
Sure.
So that was fascinating. Is still the most intellectually interesting, difficult, never-ending Rubik's Cube of complexity that I've ever done.
So just to clarify, you were classroom teaching when we first started to receive our immigrant population from Africa?
Yes.
That is really, really cool to think about. What year was that?
I want to say that was around 2010, maybe 2011, maybe. Now, don't quote me on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's how I've phrased it to people to say, okay, here's how quickly things changed. From the Amarillo that I, started living here when 1983. When I worked at the radio station, I worked for KDJW after I worked at the Easy Listening radio station. I worked at the country station. In that building, KDJW, KBUY, on Amarillo Boulevard, when I started teaching, these students had changed into an East African grocery store. And that, to me, showed the change. It's like, that's the shift.
Yeah.
From, like, Bob Wills playing at the Aviatrix on what was then, like, one of the alternatives to Route 66, but it was like the circuit that folks played, to that shows the shift that was very quick. And all glory to the Amarillo teachers who were able to do something that is just really difficult, which is to expand and modify and adjust extremely quickly to teaching students that no one could really help us with. No one could say, here's how you do X, Y, and Z, like we were used to with students who came from Spanish-speaking countries.
Right. Well, and now, you visit some of those schools and they're receiving like 2.5 new kids a week, and their test scores at the end of the year are remarkable, and you sit in and you watch learning happen in just this it's the way that has evolved in 15, 20 years is remarkable.
That is the Amarillo teaching force, I think. I am just a representative of that kind of always looking to maybe, 5 ways to teach this, but do you know 6, 7, 8 ways to teach this, or 9, 10, 11 ways? I don't think that there are any teachers teaching in our area that are complacent with, good enough is good enough. I think it's just the nature of who we are in this region. And maybe some of it is a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because every other place in the state gets attention, and we're like, well, excuse me, we have some things going on in here that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that resonates with, we're going to solve our own problems, right? Like, okay, great, we've got this whole new slice of our community. We're going to figure out how to hug on them and love on them and teach them how to read.
Yes, and one of my favorite stories, and I have a picture of it, is one of my students from the Kakuma refugee camp. She came to school probably 6 months in, 8 months in to being here with a Dallas Cowboys jersey over her hijab. And I thought that was hilarious and showed, okay, we now have a Cowboys fan for life here. But just, to think about what they had come from, because they came here. I mean, when we hear refugee, we don't really think about what that means. And it really is a matter of running for your life and not knowing where you're going to end up. Just, I don't want to be basically in the mouth of a shark, as one Somali poet has written. And coming here, for at least the students from East Africa, I think there was a lot of familiarity as far as like the landscape. But when you think about our refugee students from Myanmar, like those were jungles, like dense jungles. And then you come here and it must have been like coming to the surface of the moon, I think. And they had their own just deep humanitarian crises, war. I stopped doing this assignment because I realized I was not soothing trauma, I was evoking trauma. It took me a long time and God bless the folks teaching trauma-informed teaching, but I would ask them, draw me a picture of something you've seen that you can't forget, because that always worked with my Spanish-speaking students. And the things they drew were like, okay, I now need to find counseling services for these students, because these things that they're drawing are horrific.
Yeah. And I think now, looking at our African population now, it is in many ways very well supported and built out, and still has challenges. We still need to figure out how to make employment pathways that get out of meat processing, plants and things like that. But to think about how that transformation and arc has occurred since they started showing up in your classrooms is pretty remarkable.
Right. It is. And I just can't even imagine being in their shoes. I can't imagine being a mom that would have to take my young children to a completely different world, basically. I just can't imagine. So there's a part of me that will always live and breathe in the north side of Amarillo and in those communities with those families, because I truly loved my time there and wasn't quite ready to leave the classroom. I still have my certification. I keep it current because you never know.
It's a very teacher thing to do.
Probably, yeah.
Does your marketing feel like a shot in the dark? Are your social media posts getting lost in the scroll? Unlock your business's potential with SKP Creative. They know your audience and design posts that reflect your brand and drive real engagement. From scroll-stopping social media content to powerful traditional marketing, graphic design, and website development, SKP Creative covers it all. Are you ready to elevate your feed and turn your marketing into a success story? Visit skpcreative.com today. So you mentioned it being a masterclass in teaching that apparently was like pretty successful for you, because you became a very successful teacher. You've got quite a couple of accolades there on your teacher shelf. Can you talk to me about the process of kind of like getting to some of the really, really cool awards?
Oh gosh, that, and here's the part of it that's the backstory that people don't think about. I called myself for a long time the Susan Lucci of teachers, because I got really good at losing Teacher of the Year for the campus. I would be like one of the finalists, one of the nominees, and would lose. And so I really adopted the graceful losing and perfected that as an art form. And so I did not know how to handle it when it became a case of, oh, no, this time it's actually your name going forward. Just to have that happen was stunning. And it is true that when the people that see you every day, my colleagues at Paladar High School, those are the folks that put you forward. And to me, that's like the deepest compliment I could have ever received, because they knew the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we all did, that
Totally.
taught together every day. It was a big deal for me. I think it was a big deal because of the neighborhood that Paladura was situated in, and you know, our students.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you think about it, good gracious, Texas has the most teachers of any state, even more than New York or California, which is kind of hard to believe. So we have around 350,000 teachers, public school teachers. And to realize that Amarillo is like, this is where we zoomed in, and then we zoomed in the Paladura cluster is really fascinating. So that's really, that process is sort of like ground zero, and then from there, it's a series of almost like, my daughters called it the Hunger Games. It's not quite that hard. But you go to the city, then Region 16, and then Amarillo, Texas has 20 education service centers. So Region 16 is one of the 20. So there are 2 teachers from each of those regions, and from that, they narrow it down to 3 people elementary, 3 people secondary for Texas Teacher of the Year. And they pick 1 elementary and 1 secondary, and from those 2, they pick the Texas teacher. And so that's how that went. Then for national teacher, it's every state and then every U.S. territory, if they're able to participate that year. So that might be the Virgin Islands, that might be Puerto Rico, that might be Guam, the Northern Marianas Islands, plus the Department of Defense, which is the worldwide schools, you know, for our military bases. So of that group, then they winnow it down to 4 finalists, and from the 4 finalists that go, it's an intense process to go through.
Are you doing like interviews?
Yes, and I will. I mean,
Are
really,
y'all not all? I'm just like, I believe that you are a remarkable educator, period. But like, when you get to that point, are y'all just not like, okay, we're all like very good? I can't imagine, you know what I mean? There's not, like, I can't imagine there's like a standout, right?
Yeah.
Among the top 4.
And thank you for saying that, Skylar, because I do think that that's the misnomer. It certainly was when I would go to other places during that year. And I mean, the way that it was put to me by one of my mentors is that to become a finalist for National Teacher, you win a writing contest. Oh. So you write, I wrote like, oh gosh, what was it? 6, 7 essays, different essays. And you can imagine it skews heavy on English teachers because of that.
Okay.
And then to win National Teacher, my mentor said, you win a speaking contest. And in many ways, that's the case. So you are put through a simulation of how would you show up in these various instances, starting with probably one of the oddest experiences of my life, which was being told, okay, you're coming to this weekend in Washington, D.C., and basically when the wheels hit the runway, you are on. And, you know, just imagine that you are always on. And for somebody like me that has a anxiety disorder, that was like, oh my gosh, I can't relax, I can't sleep. But the first event was to speed date the people who would be interviewing you. And it was like a group of 15 stakeholders from all of these national organizations. And your job was to try to connect with them at this sort of cocktail hour as fast as you could, to at least try to meet everybody and learn some things about them, connect with them, whatever. And then you went to this multi-course dinner where, as each course was served, you got up and switched places and sat with another group of people and you started over, and you had to be charming and wonderful.
That sounds awful already.
Well, I'm an introvert, and so it was excruciating.
Yes,
It was excruciating for me. That's probably the hardest thing I did. Everything else sort of paled in comparison to that.
Well, such fabricated, interaction. It's like,
gosh.
Ew.
Yes, very contrived. And at the time, I was like, oh, I don't like this at all. And I don't even get why I'm doing this. Well, that actually was the bulk of so much of what I did. Anybody can request the national teacher to come speak, for free. And so people from everywhere, all these different places would say, okay, we want her to come. And so it might be I would be picked up at the Atlanta airport by a stranger and driven 2 hours into the interior of Georgia and have to connect with this person and then go to dinner with the group of people who'd brought me in there. And so I realized that actually was so much of the experience. Then the next day, what we did is we went through an actual press conference where they had actual press from the Washington Post, et cetera, Education Week, all these people in there asking real questions to us as a panel. And so, you're a group of people who are evaluating you are in there watching how you do that. And so it's intense, and you realize that the job is you are the point person that kind of goes and does what my dad did, which is instead of selling oil field equipment, I'm selling public education. Like you open the door anywhere, I'm going to show up and talk about that and talk about why it's great, why it's unique to our way of life here in America, et cetera, and so on. So I did that and traveled. I stopped counting at 300,000 miles. I'm not even sure what I ended up as in 7 countries and almost every state except Alaska and Hawaii.
Wow. What year was that?
2015.
In 2015.
Yeah, 2015, 2016. That's about it runs usually from spring to spring.
So do you leave the classroom for that, obviously? And you spend that year like Miss Americaing it.
Yes, and you're getting to like an anecdote I used to open speeches with, and I'll tell you this, Skylar. So, okay, when I would tell this anecdote in the South, people would fall out of their chairs laughing. I would tell this anecdote in the East, and there would be silence. So I'll tell you. Not long after I was named national teacher and did the whole Washington thing, and the Globe News did the big, wonderful package on me, it was obvious that people and I wasn't used to anybody knowing who I was at all, ever. I was just Miss Peeples, room 200, Balladera High School. So I'm at Market Street where I was always shopping for groceries and all. And I'm standing in line and I become aware that this man is staring at me. And you know that sort of uncomfortable, you're really trying to get my attention and talk to me. And so I finally look over and say, hi, how are you? And he goes, you're that teacher of the year, ain't you? And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he goes, so what's that all about? What's that deal?
Uh-huh.
And I give my sort of 1-minute elevator pitch for that. And he's squinting and looking at me and nodding his head the whole time. And I'm thinking he's not really listening. But then he says, so what you're saying is like Miss America, only you ain't got to be pretty. So, again,
just cut right through the fat we do around here. Listen.
In the South, that killed. I used to open speeches saying, it's to let me talk about what Teacher of the Year was and public education and blah, blah, blah. And the painful silence on the East Coast.
Oh, yes, I imagine.
And people, there would be sharp intakes of breath and everything. And women would come up to me afterwards and they would say, "You are beautiful. You are a beautiful person." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't take it that way."
Yeah.
No, I didn't take it that way at all. And I would have to just apologize to them because they were just like, "Oh my goodness."
That's so
But
funny.
yeah, there you go.
That's great. What an incredible. So in a year then, you said 7 countries and almost all 50? That's a lot.
It was a lot. And my kids were grown.
Okay.
And so I was able to do these crazy things and go all over. So I did. And the State Department that year had decided that they wanted to try to send the national teacher overseas because they said, why are we not using our national teacher as an ambassador of U.S. education? And I'd never been out of the country except for, over the border in El Paso and, Tijuana and all of that. So I'd never really gone anywhere.
Wow.
So I'd really never had a passport because you didn't have to have one to do that.
That's right.
And they were like, "You need to get your passport like yesterday." So I had to get a passport, and
I bet the State Department helped out a little bit.
it was pretty quick, but they had to wait to green light me because they said the first place that's requested you, we don't know if it's entirely safe for you to go or if the ambassador thinks it's safe enough. And I'm like, "Gracious, where?" And they're like, "Well, Beirut is the first place that wanted you to come, and then other places in the Middle East, but you'll spend most of your time in Beirut." And I was like, "Beirut, the one that we learned about when I was in high school? The base was bombed?" So I'm thinking this, and I'm like, "Okay, but somebody will go with me and it'll be fine."
Yeah.
No one went with me. I went by myself.
What? I was just thinking. My
Yeah.
next question was how cool is it to travel with the State Department?
Nope.
Oh,
I went over there by myself. So yeah, they put me on a plane at Dulles Airport, and I was picked up at the airport in Beirut by huge, lineman-sized men, huge, guards, and get into this SUV that the glass on it, is 6 inches thick.
Oh my gosh.
And they get in, and I realized this is way back when, before we now have all these cameras in our car, but they had all the cameras on the car where you could see all around it. And then they had these huge holsters in the wheel wells for their automatic weapons.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I guess I feel safe, as long as I'm in the car. But yeah, it was a series of that kind of thing repeatedly going all over. And I went to China twice and went from the very, almost Mongolia all the way down to Zhuhai. And it was crazy. So lots of things. So
That's
lots of
crazy.
things. Yeah.
So a minute ago, you said you were, that when you were going through the interview process to be awarded or to be determined who was going to be Teacher of the Year, it was your opportunity to sell public education. And this might just be telling of selfishness on my own part. I would have thought that you were selling yourself as a teacher. And I think that's a really interesting difference. So, yeah, what was that opportunity to, obviously in your perspective, sell pub ed as opposed to selling how great of a teacher Shanna Peeples is?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that's a very interesting difference because my brain would have said you're selling yourself, how good you are and how impactful you were on the north side of Amarillo. You know what I mean?
Oh, my goodness. I think a lot of people thought that. And and it's true. This is not just me being, I'm just deferring. I don't think I was the best teacher at Palo Duro. I think that the best teacher was my mentor, Elaine Laughlin, certainly one of the best there. So That's not to negate that you don't get to show off sometimes. Certainly in China, I was always having to disabuse them because they would say, "You're the number one teacher." And I'm like, no, 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 no. You're America's number one teacher. And they would advertise, "Come here, America's number one teacher, America's best." And I'm like, no, 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 that's not that at all. And I only teach one subject. If you throw math problems and stuff at me, I will become mute. They wanted their money's worth for flying me over to China. And so I did 7 events a day, and China is the exact opposite schedule of us here. So I was constantly sleep deprived for the 2 weeks that I was there, and just almost hallucinating. I was so tired. And they would say, "Now you're going to go here and here and here and here." And they would do these things that I characterize as stunt teaching. And they would never tell me when they were coming. They would say, "Oh, yeah, yes, you will do your speech. And then after your speech, we're going to bring in middle school students and put them on this stage, and you're going to teach them a lesson." And these are kids I've never met. Their English was probably at intermediate level, which was kind of the English language learner I was used to, but
Okay.
still. And I'm like, and teach them a lesson of what? And so that's when I had to really rely on, okay, let's shuffle the deck of cards in my head and think about the things that worked with most of the classrooms that I taught in. And maybe we'll find something out of that. So I did a lot of weird stunt teaching like that. Yes, for the year. And it was only overseas. It was no one in the United States ever asked that.
Yeah.
But overseas, there was the thought of, okay,
Perform.
Okay, Miss Thing, let's see what you've got. Yeah.
How interesting. I feel like the answer is yes, but I am still interested to hear you reflect. Are you glad that you went through that experience?
Oh,
Some
my
of it
goodness.
sounds quite challenging, quite performative. Some of it, of course, it's an amazing opportunity to be a representative of, Amarillo Stars and all that stuff. But how do you reflect on that? That sounds like a bonkers year.
That's it. And it was. I said at the time that it was like riding a bull. It's just like they open the chute and you've got and because they put in, I was National Teacher of the Year 2015. So you come into the thing with an expiration date, kind of. So you've only got 1 year. And it is. It's like we're pulling the gate.
This will stop.
Hang on to the bull because I hope you're prepared because this is what you're going to get. And every year is different for everybody. People do different things happen for folks.
Sure.
I am deeply, profoundly grateful for it. It changed my life. It changed how I thought about teaching, or what I thought schools were for, or why we even do these things. These things I'd never really thought about until I went to places where the school had been destroyed and the teachers had rebuilt it. Or I went to places where teachers built the school and dug the well for the water. That changed my thinking. And I realized then that school is not just this thing or this, we have to go to school. School really is a promise that a community makes not only to itself but to its young people, that it has a future and a hope. And teachers are the ones who stand at the doorway, and they are that hope embodied every day.
It seems like you've spent some time thinking about that.
A little bit.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. But it's true. I'm not the type that gets tattoos, and frankly, that's too long to be a tattoo. But if I did, it would be on the inside of my arm.
Okay, so after your whirlwind bull ride, you did not return to the classroom. Is that correct?
That's
public
correct.
Education K-12 classroom.
Well, correct. So my superintendent at the time, and that was Dana West.
Okay.
She and I talked because Rod Schroeder he was finishing out, like he went to the White House with me, and he was changing over that year.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. West and I talked about what would be the best thing. And she said, you've been so many places, you've seen so many different kinds of systems. I would like you to try, just see if you think you might like central office. And so that's what I did for a year, and found out, no, I do not like central office, and I am not good at it. And anyone that's listening to this that knew me then knows I'm telling the truth. My skill set is not that.
Okay.
But I was still doing some speaking events, and I had spoken at a Gear Up Texas, which you probably knew of at that time, very much a kind of raise your hand Texas type of thing. They had asked me to speak, and I spoke right after a wonderful teacher or professor from Harvard. And she handed me her card and said, you ought to think about coming through our doctorate program. And I was like, whatever. I don't think so. And she was like, no, I think you'd really like that. And so on a whim, I applied thinking there's no way, because I think my year 600 people applied for 25 spots in the cohort. And if you won one of those 25 spots, they paid for your way, essentially. They paid your tuition. You had to pay all the rest and find a place to live and all that. And you had to go and live there for 3 years.
And this is for the full doctoral program at Harvard?
Mm-hmm.
No big deal.
I thought, I'm not going to get it, but at least I can say I did it. And it became this process. I was like, oh, I know this rodeo. I know how this goes.
This is familiar.
This cutting of cohorts and, this weekend flying you into Boston for similar types of put you through these paces that were ridiculously stressful, unbelievably difficult. Like, we're going to give you this manila envelope that's sealed, and inside this envelope, don't open it or you will be kicked out. Inside this envelope, when we tell you to open it, you have 30 minutes, almost like Mission Impossible. You have 30 minutes to figure out what to do based on what you read. And we're going to put you with 5 other strangers, and you're going to do this basically performance task in front of all of these evaluators. And I was like, yeah, okay, I got this. Why don't you bring in a middle school class from China? And
let's go.
I mean, there was a part of me that was kind of sassy until I got into it. And I was like, oh, gracious. Because it's a case study that was written by like Harvard Business School. And you have 30 minutes to figure out what it means, what you're going to do, what recommendations you're going to make. And then you have to work with these other people who are trying to take you out. Like, they want your spot, but you've got to work collaboratively. So it was a whole different level of, I'm used to the teacher world, and we play nice with each other, and we like each other. I'm not used to this. And so, yeah. So didn't think that would happen, but it did. So I got one of those spots and was, again, another one of those where at the time, it was insanely stressful and difficult and challenging, and poured Miracle Grow on all my flaws. And but again, life-changing. And I think that, you come out of that kind of experience thinking, and I think they encourage you to think, oh, well, this is the golden ticket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Mm-hmm. You can go anywhere. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the case.
Really?
Yeah, and and a lot of the problem is, how do I, at this level, then affect what I say I care about? So if I say I truly care about these kids in these classrooms, then what's the job that gets closest to that? And those are hard to find. And I was asked by my thesis chair, what do you want to, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, I think I'd kind of like to take everything I've learned here, and I'd kind of like to be a professor. And he just laughed and said, those jobs don't exist for people like you that came up through K-12. Like, you would have had to have started on that track in the sort of professorial track.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, that's really sad. And so and about that time is when COVID happened, and they shut down DC, and I had to finish my doctoral residency that I was doing on Capitol Hill. I had to finish it remotely here in Amarillo. And my grandmother was at the end of her life, and she was a deeply important person to me. So I was glad, in a way, to be home, and then took over care of my mother, who was discovered not long after my grandmother died that she had a brain tumor, and so took care of my mom till she passed. And in the midst of all of that, WT reached out to me and said, hey, we have this position if you're interested. It's an educational leadership sort of chair. It's the distinguished chair in education. And I was like, say less.
Yeah.
I will come and do that. And so they have been marvelous to me in as far as like allowing me to be there for endings and beginnings, because my grandchild, one so far, was born during this whole time. So a lot of this has been, Proust has this saying where he said that the real voyage isn't to go away and see new things. The real voyage is to come home and see home with new eyes. And that's what I've tried to do.
Mm. And what eyes do you see home with after your voyage?
That is a great question. Something I will say is, doesn't matter that I grew up in Borger and spent almost all of my adult life here in Amarillo. There were parts of the Panhandle I never visited. And so it was very easy for me to sit in my office in Canyon and say, oh, well, here's what I think about our area, and here's what I think we should do. And, and how arrogant of me to think that way. So here recently, my workflow has been, let's get out and actually see. Let's visit the communities that I'm having to set my GPS to find. Never been to Stratford, never been to Wheeler, never been to Canadian, not been to these places. Been to Perryton, but only because my great-grandparents lived there. So let's just look at each of these places and see what we see. And surprisingly, completely different places. There are certain things that you can say about a rural area, but that's where it ends. And so it really has exploded in my brain, this idea of rural schools are one thing and rural schools are all alike. No, they're not. So a lot of the research I'm doing has returned some really interesting things about our area that I think have implications for Texas, because Texas is 60%-ish rural. And what we're discovering as patterns here, particularly after House Bill 2 and the way it's changing things, I think has implications for the rest of the state. And that's really exciting. When I've been working with Region 16, I said, what I've found is HB 2 gives all of this amount of money to schools. But in a way, it's like those booths when you go to the carnival and they blow the dollar bills and you try to grab as many as you can. That's what it's like. And they did it so fast that we need to figure out, how do we help all of our folks get in the booth and get as much of that as possible and be able to use that? Because as it stands right now, some people don't even know the booth exists. And that's part of having to be a very remote area where you may have lost your superintendent that's been there for 30 years. And you're going to have a hard time recruiting somebody to come and live in some of these places that are geographically remote from Amarillo. But we found cool things across the Panhandle that we think can scale and have implications for other places. So that's really exciting work. And it is back to that sort of promise I made to myself of what's the work you're going to do with all of this that's going to affect classrooms, real students in real classrooms.
What do you think about when you think about the profession of educator today?
Oh goodness, let me try not to climb up on a soapbox. But one of the things I will say is, I think that, and me included, when I first became a teacher, I think many of us outside of school buildings think that because we sat in a desk for most of our young lives, we know what teaching is. And how hard can it be? Because we watched it for 12 years. So it can't be that hard. I mean, anybody can do it. And I think that's the first sort of misconception that folks have. And then I think because it is a largely female workforce, there is a sense of another sort of downgrading of the professionalism as that's just babysitting. You're just babysitting. And both of those are really disrespectful to the work that folks do in those classes. And I would say, if you think it's so easy, here's my little challenge to you. Why don't you teach somebody under 7 years old how to whistle? Just try that. See how far you get. See how easy it is. Because it's not. Teaching is difficult, and we forget that. And we forget that the way that we learned it was difficult. So I think that that's one of the things that alarms me. And then this flattening of teaching and learning that I think is disrespectful to not just teachers, but to the students and all of us, which is that AI can come in and do the work, whatever you conceive the work to be. So if you think education is, here's some like discrete problems or worksheets, do these, turn them in, I give you points, there, school is done. If that is your model, then yeah, probably AI can do that. ChatGPT is pretty good at that. But who wants their kid taught by ChatGPT? Nobody does. You want a human being that sees your kid and knows your child for like the special individual they are and knows what's going on with them. And that is crucial to child development. We know this. This is not just me saying. There are decades of research on psychological development, and I think we see a lot of what happens when we turn too many things over to a screen. Mm-hmm. There are arguably good things, and I am no Luddite that says I hate AI. I would probably say I'm a power user, and I don't hate technology. But I think you have to do it the other way around, which is, what is it I want to teach, and how can technology help me teach that, rather than how can technology do it so either I don't have to because it's too hard, or somebody looking at it, you know what, I'm going to let ChatGPT do it because you're too expensive. Chat, $20 a month fee is way cheaper than what I pay you in benefits and salary. So to me, we're at sort of this dangerous inflection point where we have to think about who do we want in those classrooms? Do we want screens, and do we want a large language model? Do we want some sort of hybrid, or do we want people? And how are we preparing and supporting those people to do some of the hardest work there is?
What are you excited about? Sounds like some of your work in rural spaces.
There is a way I have been taught to think about anxiety that you can reframe anxiety by saying, instead of saying, I'm so scared about, you can say, I'm so excited about. So hear me when I say I'm so excited about the rapid change that we're looking at, because I think we are in a point where things, as they're changing, I think there's a possibility to do some really interesting rethinking of school and teaching and learning. And this may be the inflection point where we start to look at different models to where, and I'm not saying abandon anything, but where we look at how does school only take place in these four walls in this building. And one of the things I've been working on that's super exciting for me is sort of taking all of these threads together and saying, what if I turn your attention and your curiosity to here? So here you are, young person in this area. What do you know about this area? Not a lot. Have you been out in this terrain? Not a lot. So what happens if I take you and I put you out in and I encourage you to walk around and be in nature and all of this, and to explore your history and to use the resources of the Texas History Portal? And does that change how you think about yourself? Does it change how you think about this area? Does it maybe make you not want to leave here and never come back? Does it make it seem like someplace you start to care about and might want to maybe not return forever, but return sometimes and maybe share things you've learned? And my initial research says yes. Yes. And that is cheap and easy and flexible to do. So I'm in I just finished phase 2. The Area Foundation generously gave me a grant to explore that.
Oh, nice.
Mary Emily graciously gave us the venue at Mariposa, and Wildcat Bluff worked with us, and just a group of, it started out, we did this over spring break, and you can imagine the type of kid that would opt into a 1-week camp over spring break. So I was lucky to work with some amazing students from every one of the high schools that opted in. The Amarillo high schools. We did have some folks from some Canyon ISD, but then they weren't able to complete it because of like family issues, and there were other reasons. But someone from each of the high schools here in Amarillo went through this, and they've done amazing work, and we're now working together. They're my co-authors on some of the research, and I want to take them to some research conferences and have them present alongside me of, here's this cool thing we've learned about place-based learning and attachment and belonging.
I can't wait to hear more about that as it continues to unfold.
Yes. Oh, well, I will tell you all about it. It's life-giving work. So both of these things these are like the coolest projects I could have ever been fortunate enough to work on.
This episode is sponsored by the Amarillo Art Institute at Arts in the Sunset, a center for Amarillo's vibrant art scene. They've got classes and galleries and monthly events open to the public, including the First Friday Art Walk and their summer market. That's every Saturday from 8 in the morning until noon, and features artists, artisans, and the Golden Spread Farmers Market. That runs early June through mid-September. Check them out on Facebook. That's the Amarillo Art Institute at Arts in the Sunset. All right, I'm back with Dr. Shanna Peeples. Shanna, this is part of the show we call 8 Straight. I've got 8 questions for you.
Okay.
When you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
I hope for sustainability, and I hope that we are thriving and well and successful.
When was the last time you went to Paladuro Canyon?
Last year.
Nice. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
What does this area have too much of? Oh, goodness. The dirt that comes with the wind.
I have old windows and doors, so I get plenty of that in my home. All of the dirt.
Yes.
And what does this area not have enough of?
It doesn't have enough of the cachet that it deserves that other regions in Texas get. I think people forget about us. So I think attention. And I would say that attention from the state level, from Austin on up.
What's your favorite local building?
I love the Herring Hotel. I just love it. I drove by it for years, and I love the little sign. I'm not a has-been, I'm a will-be. I love it, and it's just a cool building, and all the stories about it are cool.
And it's an exciting time for the Herring
It
Hotel.
is. It is. Its time has come.
Yes, that will be beautiful. Is already beautiful, in fact.
Yeah.
Favorite local restaurant?
If I were pushed to say, where do I go often because I love it and it's consistent, and take everyone who ever visits me out of town, it's one of two places, okay? So I'm just going to say two.
Yes.
That's going to be OHMS, and it's going to be Cellar 55.
Nice. Okay, you have 4 hours to spend in Amarillo with someone who's never been here. What are you guys doing?
Well, we'd probably go to eat first, and we'd probably go on a little, a little crawl of different restaurants. I might save the canyon for last, and we might go look at the Cadillacs, but I think I would go to Wildcat Bluff, and I would hope the museum would be open somewhere because I would want to go there as well. But I'd go to the Amarillo Art Museum too because those are some gorgeous collections. I would go and walk around any of like Sam Houston Park, Memorial Park, just because those green spaces have a lot of serenity in them. I think that we might road trip just a bit to maybe eat at a couple of other places. You can see I am middle-aged, and it's clear what motivates me is food.
I plan any trip around food. So if I were your stranger for 4 hours, I would expect the food game to be strong.
Yes, and we'd probably go to 6th Street, and get lost in some of the cool stores, particularly the antique stores.
Yeah.
And the cool shops that we have there. Yeah, there is a lot to see and do, depending on what it is you want to do. I might see if we could go out to Dove Creek and hug some horses. I don't know. There's all kinds of things. I'm a planner, Skylar, so I would sit down and I would rack my brain to seem as though it had come off as just, breezy and spur of the moment, but I would have done hours of planning.
That's so funny. Finally, Shanna, what do you think people get wrong about Amarillo?
That we're simply a portal of nostalgia. I think that we are so much more than that. And when I think about this, I think, Route 66, sure, okay. But Route 66 we haven't ended. It wasn't just one story. It's a continuing story. And now maybe the highways and the superhighways we have are in the wind farms that we have. Maybe it will be connecting these power lines that we have of all of the different forward-thinking energy sources that we are doing here in Texas. And just the forward thinking that we're doing as far as the investments in healthcare and all of the other sectors that are represented here. That's what I think. We're not just nostalgia.
Finally, I'd like to offer my guests the opportunity to endorse something. What's something you would endorse for listeners?
Oh, gosh. I would endorse, I do this in my grandmother's memory. My Meemaw grew up in real food insecurity, and she spent her life making sure everybody around her had something to eat. And so I donate to the food bank, the High Plains Food Bank, in her memory and honor. And I very much endorse that as a way to continue not just my grandmother's legacy, but the legacy of all of us who love these restaurants and grew up in similar places where our Meemaws did the same thing for us.
Lovely. Dr. Peeples, thank you so much for your work and for loving on our area, loving on our kids.
You're welcome.
And for your time this morning.
It's been delightful, Skylar. Thank you so much.
And that concludes this episode. Thanks to Dr. Peeples for the interview. Thank you to SKP Creative and the Amarillo Art Institute for supporting the podcast, and to Broderick Adams for editing every week. And thank you for listening. This has been episode 459 of Hey Amarillo. My name's Skylar Gallup, and we hope you'll listen next week.